Hello, welcome back. Welcome. I hope that you are returning. If you're not, make sure that you watch episode 1 before you watch this episode. I go through the statement of case from the Commonwealth. That's the title of the episode, is the Commonwealth, and it's the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and what they are stating happened the night that John O'Keefe was found unresponsive on the front lawn of a fellow Boston police officer's lawn. He was in police. He was law enforcement. The other individuals are also law enforcement. The woman that is being charged with the crime of his unaliving is Karen Reed. She's out on bail right now. She's going to go to trial in March. At least that's when it's set for. And she was the girlfriend of John, and the state, the Commonwealth, is stating that she got so angry one night and just ran John over with her car in front of this home because they were drinking out, having drinks and shots, and they were in an argument, and so she decided in a fit of rage to run him over. So that's kind of what the state is saying, or the Commonwealth. And this episode sorry about that. This episode is going to be the defendant's case, what they're stating. The episode 1, I read the statement of case, which was actually filed in the courts in June. I don't know the exact date. I just know that it was filed in June. And the events of the night that we're talking about occurred January 29th, between January 28th and 29th, 2022, in Canton, Massachusetts. And these are the people involved. We'll hopefully over time, the more I repeat these names, the better you'll understand them. But I do hope to have an episode just to kind of go over who each of the individual characters in the story are. And then hopefully that'll help you out. But I believe that's episode 3 is the characters. Anyways, let's, so what I'm going to be reading today is this is the defendant's motion for order pursuant to Massachusetts R Crime P Code, whatever, 17, directed to Brian Albert, Julie Albert, Colin Albert, Brian Higgins, and the Commonwealth of memorandum in support thereof. So, this actually is, this document was filed in September. It's going to go over some of the same details that we went over during episode 1, but I think it's a great document because it repeats the state's or the Commonwealth's case, and then they kind of counter argue everything as we go along. So you'll see why I chose this particular document. Is actually, so they're trying to get the communications of this was a summons of their showing, their being witnesses. No, it is for the cell phone, sorry. Okay, so now comes defendant Karen Reed, Ms. Reed, or the defendant. Here it will be, they'll refer to her as also, and respectfully moves this court to 1, issue a summons pursuant to Mass R Criminal Code, whatever, ordering key percipient witnesses Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, those are the two that own the home where John was found. Matthew McCabe, Julie Albert. Julie Albert is a relative of the Alberts. I'm not sure how. Maybe a sister. Um, excuse me. So Julie Albert, and which we know she was the person who called her brother, Ryan Nagel, to come and get her. Or no, that's Julie Nagel. Sorry, Julie Nagel, who's also listed on here, is the one that went to go get. She sent her brother a text to get a ride home from this residence, although she when they got there, she asked him to come in. He declined, and then she went back inside. Okay, so that's Julie Nagel, Julie Albert, and so there's two Julies. There's a Brian Higgins and a Colin Albert, who is the nephew, I believe, of Brian and Nicole Albert. So it's a lot of people, a lot of family know one another. All right, so Karen Reed's defense team is asking for a summons to be issued for these individuals to provide to the clerk of court in advance of trial, which, remember, is set in March. So by September, they still haven't received the communication. And this is obviously, you would think that this is relevant to their case, to find out the communications of their phone calls and texts. Anyways, in advance of trial, any cell phones used by the respective parties on January 28th, 2022, so that defense counsel may conduct a forensic examination of the parties' respective cell phones for the purpose of recovering location data for a 7-day period spanning January 28th to February 4th, and communications sent and or received by the respective individuals between January 28th and February 28th, so a month there. And 2, to issue an order that the Commonwealth produce a complete copy of the Cellbrite. Cellbrite is a third-party company that can extract information from cell phones, even deleted information and whatnot. So it gives you a report, and it's used often in court. All right, so that they're asking for the report of any Cellbrite extractions obtained from Jennifer McCabe's phone, and so that they can examine it. I don't know, and whatever the common law is. Okay, so where was the one? Sorry, I missed a footnote somewhere. I don't know where the footnote came in. Oh, right at the end. I didn't miss it. Okay, so law enforcement previously completed a forensic download and extraction of Jennifer McCabe's cell phone in connection with this case. To date, however, the Commonwealth has conveniently limited its forensic analysis and subsequent production of Ms. McCabe's cell phone records to communications between Ms. McCabe, John O'Keefe, Karen Reed, and Carrie Roberts. So it seems like she's being a little shady, or they're being a little shady with the forensic data from Jen McCabe's phone. And this scribble on here is a note from Judge Beverly Cannoni denying this motion. However, they did take it to the Supreme Court, and I believe the Supreme Court overruled. I'm not exactly sure where it went at that point. There's so much going on in this case. It's so hard to follow all of it. But I wanted to bring you this because it's a really good document. So, very well written by the defense team. John O'Keefe, introduction. John O'Keefe was found unresponsive in the early morning hours of January 29th, 2022 in the front yard of the Canton home of Boston police officer Brian Albert. O'Keefe had been beaten severely and left for dead, having sustained blunt force injuries to both sides of his face as well as the back of his head. In addition to suffering numerous defensive wounds on his hands consistent with a brutal fight, O'Keefe also suffered a cluster of what appear to be deep scratches or bite marks to his right upper arm and forearm. Footnote number 2. Where'd it go? Photographs. Okay, so there are photographs attached. They're in black and white, though, so it's difficult to see. I only obtained the one of the arm for you, so trigger warning: if graphic content scares you or it grosses you out or whatever, please look away. I'm going, just for a second, I'm going to flash on the screen the injuries that he sustained on his arm, and you can decide for yourself if they look like they came from being hit by a car or possibly dog bites and dog scratches. So here, trigger warning up now, flashing now, is his arm. This was an image that was produced to the court. As you can see, there's deep cuts, lacerations here, and you can see they almost look like a pattern of claw marks or even teeth marks, possibly. But I think it's claw marks. I'm not sure, but I think a bite would be more obvious. Whereas the claws, it's, they clawed. I have German Shepherds myself, which the Alberts owned a German Shepherd named Chloe. So that's why this is very important, and we need to know. All right, sorry for the trigger warning, people. I'm going to take it down. Pictures down. You can come back to the screen if you like to read along with me. Oh shoot, I am too big for you guys. I need to move my camera over a little. Shrink me down. Sorry about that. All right. So, now you know what his arm looked like. It looked, to me, in my opinion, it looks like scratches, like dog canine claw marks going in because they dig. And that's what I think it was. But I don't have anything to really base that on other than I own German Shepherds. And the Alberts owned a German Shepherd as well, named Chloe, who is now unaccounted for, potentially. We don't know. We'll get to that later. Okay. So, continuing on, Brian Albert, a highly trained boxer. So the owner of the home is a highly trained boxer and a fighter. Has deep familial and personal ties with two other police agencies, the Canton Police Department and the Massachusetts State Police, the very agencies that took control of the investigation of O'Keefe's death, which is a ginormous conflict of interest. And they're just saying in the footnotes here that they have photos of Brian Albert showing personal ties with law enforcement and probably boxing and whatnot. So, excuse me. Even more alarmingly, Brian Albert has an intimate and personal relationship with Massachusetts State Police Trooper Michael D. Proctor. Remember Proctor? Okay, so Proctor is one of the lead detectives on this. But he is, well, let me read this first. Okay. So Trooper Proctor, the lead investigator assigned to the case. So he is the lead investigator. And he has a personal relationship with the individual who owns the home. So, like I said, huge conflict. All right. So all of the individuals who were present at the home of Brian Albert in the hours before O'Keefe was found deceased in his yard are related to Brian Albert and or have a close personal relationship with him and his family. So everyone that was there that night, with the exception of John and Karen, are very, very close to the Alberts, which is probably why Karen was like, just make sure that we're allowed to be there, because she wasn't entirely sure that they were supposed to be there, which is why she was waiting on John to come back and let her know that that it was okay for them to come in. Although she did say to investigators that she went home because of an upset stomach, so she might not have stayed anyways, but he was still supposed to get back to her, because otherwise she probably would have driven him home, which is my assumption. Anyways, all right, so unsurprisingly, Brian Albert has exerted an enormous amount of control over this investigation, going so far as to hold an in-person meeting with the percipient witnesses at his residence in the hours immediately following the discovery of O'Keefe's body, and ensuring that he was in close proximity to them as they were interviewed by the Canton police. So Brian Albert is inserting himself into the investigation of another fellow police officer's untimely demise. All right, so, and I apologize if anybody doesn't understand why sometimes I might use code words. It's because YouTube doesn't like certain words and they will shadow ban your video, and what doesn't get out, they don't send it to the right algorithms. And I've probably already said a bunch of words reading through this, but when I'm talking and it's my commentary, I will try to say unaliving instead of like the K-I double L word. Those are the things that YouTube doesn't like, certain terms or phrases. So I'm going to try my best. I'm learning as I go which ones I'm not supposed to say. I watch tons of true crimes channels, so I already know kind of, but we'll learn as we go. So bear with me. And I apologize for not saying the actual words that I mean, but sometimes I have to use code because YouTube. All right. So where did I leave off? All right. Brian inserts himself into the investigation. So, sorry, dog needs assistance getting out of the blanket. All right. So Brian Albert exerts an enormous amount of control over the investigation, going so far as to hold an in-person meeting with the witnesses at his residence hours immediately following the discovery of his body, and ensuring that he was in close proximity to them when they were being interviewed. So he was kind of hovering in the background, I guess, while the other attendees... Sorry, my hair is bothering me. So he was kind of hovering in the background while the other attendees from that night were being interviewed, which seems to me like he was trying to make sure nobody was saying anything that they shouldn't say. But that's speculation on my end, my opinion only. Okay, so as set forth herein, text messages and calls between and among the individuals who were at the crime scene on the early morning between January 29th and the days that followed will unquestionably provide necessary and exculpatory details regarding what actually transpired after Ms. Reed dropped O'Keefe off at Brian Albert's residence that night. Ms. Reed's constitutional right to defend herself against these charges demands that she have access to these critical communications in order to further establish the intimidation, influence, and deception that Brian Albert has injected into this investigation, along with the individuals he has used to do it. So, those are some fighting words coming from the defense, stating, Karen has a right to defend herself. She does. It's a constitutional right to receive the discovery that's needed for her case, for her defense team to properly defend her. And what's happening is they are fighting the giving their records over. They don't want to hand, none of the people at the party want to hand their records over. None of them are willing. None of them are willing to hand their phone data, all of that. When it's really important to this case, because how are we to determine the relationship between the investigators and the home where the homeowners? We need to know, and we need to, if there's a conflict of interest or if there's some shadiness happening, we need to start looking and digging deeper and asking questions. So, with that said, let's take a look at the statements of facts. Statement of facts. Facts relating to the instant case. So we're gonna rehash some of the things that we've already talked about, but this is stating, yes, the defense agrees these are facts. We all stipulate this is fact. So, the events that transpired the night before Mr. O'Keefe's death on January 29th, 2022 are largely undisputed. The evidence incontrovertibly establishes that on the evening of January 29th, the decedent, John O'Keefe, his girlfriend Karen Reed, Brian and Nicole Albert, their daughter Caitlin Albert, Jennifer McCabe, Brian Albert's sister-in-law and friend of Mr. O'Keefe, all right, Matt McCabe, who is the husband of Jennifer O'Keefe, and Brian Higgins, who is a close friend of Brian Albert, and a special agent at with the Massachusetts Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, with an office inside the Canton police office. So Brian Higgins is another law enforcement officer, but he is with the Massachusetts Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, Explosives. These are the people that went to the residence. So there were more people that were in attendance at the Waterfall Bar, but these are just the people, I believe, that were in attendance. Okay. So, or at the residence. So all of those individuals met and enjoyed drinks at the Waterfall Bar and Grill in Canton, Massachusetts. All of the witnesses interviewed in connection with this case indicated that Ms. Reed and Mr. O'Keefe appeared happy at the bar and in good spirits. So everyone says they were in good spirits. They were happy. They were having a good time. They were getting along. As the bar was set to close around midnight, the parties discussed going to Nicole and Brian Albert's residence located close by at 34 Fairview Road, the Fairview residence, to continue the party and celebrate their son, Brian Albert Jr., and his birthday. Although Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Reed were not well acquainted with the Alberts, the invitation was extended to them by Mr. O'Keefe's longtime friend, Jennifer McCabe. So herein lies the problem. Jen McCabe invites John, and therefore Karen by default, to come to this after party. And it's not her party. It's not her house. But it is her sister's house. So I guess she figured she could invite someone on her sister's behalf. So that might be why Karen wasn't sure if they were actually welcome. All right. So shortly after, I just wasn't sure if I skipped some sentences. Shortly before midnight, the Alberts, Brian, Nicole, and Caitlin, the McCabes, Jennifer and Matthew, and Brian Higgins, the ATF agent, left the bar in their respective cars and drove to Brian Albert's residence for the after party. Brian Albert Jr. was already at the house with two of his friends, Julie Nagel and another young woman who was never identified by law enforcement. So that's curious that there was another individual that they didn't identify. But okay, so there is Julie Nagel. Sorry, Brian Albert was already at the house with two of his friends, Julie Nagel and some other individual. So Julie Nagel is the one, again, that asked her brother Ryan to come pick her up, and he did, and then she didn't get in the car. So according to Nicole and Brian Albert's testimony before the grand jury, so this was taken to a grand jury. The people in this case, the witnesses, have had to appear in front of a grand jury, which is like a secret trial that only the prosecution gets to put forth evidence. Only the state, or the person with the charging documents, only they get to put forth any evidence. The defense can't be there. So it's a very unfair process as it is. But anyways, this grand jury, the witnesses, the McCabe's, the Alberts, they all had to go and testify in front of this grand jury. We're not sure. We don't know anything about it really, other than it took place. Okay. So this next part kind of details the different text messages and calls that went on between Ms. McCabe and Mr. O'Keefe, Jen and John. So text messages and call detail records conclusively establish the following timeline. This is, remember, according to the defense, we've got this timeline that they've gathered from the phone calls and text messages between their two phones. So at 12:14 a.m., Mr. O'Keefe texts Ms. McCabe where to. At 12:14 a.m., Ms. McCabe calls Mr. O'Keefe, and they discuss directions to the residence. So we've talked about that when they were getting in the car. Matt and Jen McCabe were getting in the car to go home, or to go to the Alberts' house. So then at 12:18, Mr. O'Keefe calls Ms. McCabe back. Maybe he needed some more details on the house. We don't know. At 12:27, Ms. McCabe texts Mr. O'Keefe here. So I guess she's telling, it's a question mark and an exclamation point. So she's asking him, "Are you here?" So that's at 12:27. At 12:29, Mr. O'Keefe answers a call from Ms. McCabe. So 2 minutes later. And then at 12:31, Ms. McCabe texts Mr. O'Keefe, "Pull behind me," so meaning behind her car in the driveway at the Alberts home. And then at 12:40, so 9 minutes later, Ms. McCabe texts Mr. O'Keefe, "Hello." 2 minutes later, she texts him again, "Where are you?" And then again at 12:45, "Hello." So it appears she was trying to get a hold of him and he was not answering his phone. So multiple witnesses confirmed seeing a black SUV pull up to the Albert residence at 34 Fairview Road at approximately 12:15 a.m. Thus, by all accounts, Mr. O'Keefe and his girlfriend, Karen Reed, arrived outside the Albert residence in the early morning of January 29th, 2022. So they're saying they saw, multiple witnesses have said that they saw the SUV 12:15. So if we look back at the timeline, so did John call Miss McCabe from his car? If they said that they saw the SUV pull up at 12:15, but then 12:18, Mr. O'Keefe calls Ms. McCabe back. So I wonder if that was the call, like questioning, are we both allowed to come into this party? Can we attend? Is this just, family only, or what kind of thing? So perhaps that was what that was about, but we don't know. I mean, I'm speculating. That's all speculation on my end. I don't know. But but then at 12:27, she's asking if he's here. So I don't know. It's weird. The whole thing's weird. So anyways, moving on. Do you have to go potty? Okay, potty time again. All right, so as I was saying, the multiple witnesses said they saw the car at 12:15, and then we have all these mysterious texts from Jen to John, and yeah, I don't know. So then, by all accounts, Mr. O'Keefe and his girlfriend, Karen Reed, arrived outside the Albert residence in the early morning of January 29th. So yeah, 12:15 they're saying. What transpired thereafter is less clear. According to her interview with Sergeant Michael Link, Jennifer McCabe claims that on January 29th, 2022, at around 12:30 a.m., she observed a black SUV pull up alongside the Fairview residence with the passenger side of the vehicle closest to the house. According to Ms. McCabe, although the vehicle sat outside the residence for approximately 15 minutes, no person ever came inside. So this is according to the grand jury testimony of Michael Link. He was an officer. And, excerpts from Jennifer McCabe's and John O'Keefe's cell phone extractions are also attached in Exhibit 6. All right. So, according to Trooper Proctor, remember, this is the one who has ties, has close personal ties, but they deny that they have close personal ties with the Alberts. According to Trooper Proctor, Matthew McCabe, Jennifer's husband, reported that he had observed a big dark SUV parked to the right side of the house from the front yard if you are facing the house from the street. That's also according to the grand jury testimony, and that's of Michael Proctor. So it says Mr. McCabe. Ms. McCabe further explained that Mr. McCabe. I'm sorry, that's Mr. McCabe. Further explained Matthew. I was thinking Jen. All right, so Matthew McCabe further explained that he saw the same SUV move to the other side of the property 15 feet away. So they're all saying that they saw the car move. Once it parked, or once it stopped in front of the house, then it moved a couple car lengths ahead. So later, from the kitchen window of the residence, he purportedly noted that the SUV was gone and observed tire tracks in a V shape consistent with a 3-point turn. So how did he... Okay, she peeled out of there so fast that she left tire tracks, but nobody heard her? I don't know. That doesn't make sense. And what, like, tire tracks in... on the concrete, on, the graveled street, or was there, a dirt path or something? Like, where did they see these tire tracks? I don't know, in the V shape. Did they take pictures of these? I question that. I question that he saw tire marks in a V shape, but all right, maybe he did. So Ryan Nagel, one of the only percipient witnesses present on the night in question who is not a suspect or closely related to Brian Albert, arrived at the Albert residence around 12:15. So he arrived at around the same time as Karen, and approximately the same time as Karen and John. So Mr. Nagel's observations are consistent with Ms. Reed's version of events. Ryan Nagel testified before the grand jury that he received a text from his sister Julie Nagel around 12 a.m. requesting that he pick her up at Brian Albert Jr.'s house, a longtime friend of hers for 15 years. Okay, so we know Julie Nagel is a longtime friend of Brian Albert Jr. So according to Mr. Nagel, he and his friend and girlfriend, because remember his friend was driving their own pickup truck. And then Ryan Nagel and his wife were along for the ride. Or, I'm sorry, girlfriend. So they arrived approximately 15 minutes later to pick up his sister. So they're saying, yes, they arrived around 12:15. As they drove from Dedham down Cedar Crest to take a left onto Fairview, he observed a dark SUV coming towards them from the opposite direction. So remember, they like cross paths as they turn onto the street. So the dark SUV went before them, and they followed the dark SUV towards the Fairview residence. These are all just nothing to read there. Okay. So once there, Mr. Nagel and his friends parked their Ford F-150 directly in front of the driveway alongside the property, such that the passenger side of their vehicle was adjacent to the entrance. So they were like on this side, the same side as Karen and John were. It's the passenger side to the door. Mr. Nagel testified that the dark SUV was parked in front of their vehicle facing the same direction, about 20 to 25 feet in front of him. So she pulls up. So now Mr. Nagel texts his sister to let her know that they arrived to pick her up. So sometime thereafter, Julie Nagel came outside to greet them. She said that she wanted to stay a while longer and would most likely spend the night at 34 Fairview Road. Okay, that's according to Sergeant Buchanan's grand jury testimony. Because I thought she invited him in and then said she would find another transportation. So, according to the Commonwealth, find other transportation. So this is the first I'm hearing that she's going to spend the night at 34 Fairview. And remember, that's coming from Sergeant Buchanan's testimony. All right, so as Mr. Nagel continued to try to convince his sister to get in the car, he noticed that the dark SUV pulled up a car's length or two farther in front of him. Mr. Nagel testified that the SUV was never in park because he specifically recalls that the brake lights were activated the entire time. So they were red. She had her foot on the brake pedal instead of putting the car in park. Eventually, unable to convince his sister to get in the car and leave the party, he and his friends both left. So I guess they were trying to convince the sister to get in the car. That's interesting. Unable to convince his sister to get in the car and leave the party, he and his friends left. Okay. So as they pulled up past the SUV, Mr. Nagel, who was seated in the front passenger seat of his friend's Ford F-150, observed a woman matching Karen Reed's description seated in the driver's seat of the vehicle with the interior lights of her car on and her hands on 10 and 2. Okay. So Mr. Nagel testified that he did not see a passenger inside the vehicle or anywhere else in the surrounding area of the vehicle. So John wasn't outside the vehicle, wasn't on the ground, wasn't standing around. He didn't see John at all. He only saw Karen, and she was sitting in her car by herself with the interior lights on. He further testified that he did not observe any damage to the vehicle and testified that the car's taillights were intact and undamaged. And that's important. He is a key witness for the defense, because if her taillight was not damaged at that point, that proves that the taillight damage came from when she backs out of when she's at John's house later in the morning and she goes out to try looking for him. Then she possibly hits his car. It very much looks like she does, and she's claiming that that's probably where her taillight got cracked, and that would make this statement here is really a strong case for the defense, stating that the tail light was intact before he left. So at that point, John was gone. John wasn't around anywhere near the car or in the vicinity of the car, and the tail light was still intact at that point. All right, so Ms. Reed has always maintained that she drove her boyfriend, Mr. O'Keefe, to drop him off at the Albert residence on the night in question. According to Ms. Reed, once there, Mr. O'Keefe exited the vehicle to confirm that they were in the right house. Okay, so he didn't even know that that was the right house. So hence, that was probably the other phone call that came in. Yeah, so Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Reed had never previously been to Fairview, so that would make sense that they would want to see, or to make sure that that was the correct house. So Ms. Reed waited for him for quite some time, but he never returned. After calling him several times with no answer, she eventually left, presuming he proceeded into the house for the party. Notably, Brian Albert testified at the grand jury that sometime after arriving home, he retrieved and brought his large German Shepherd dog downstairs because it was barking. That's according to his grand jury testimony, Brian Albert's testimony. So he brought his dog downstairs. Mr. Albert testified that he kept the dog restrained because it was not great with strangers. And then let the dog outside, unaccompanied, so that it could go to the bathroom in the fenced-in yard of the house. Okay, so in unusually definitive testimony, Brian Albert further insisted that he never went outside or looked outside at any point for any reason on the night in question. So Brian says he never went outside. So I guess he's just claiming, I don't know nothing because I never went out there. All right. So the Commonwealth's theory of this case, led by Trooper Proctor's investigation, appears to be that Ms. Reed became suddenly angry with Mr. O'Keefe outside the Fairview residence, she reversed into him with her vehicle while negotiating a 3-point turn, intentionally hitting him in the head with the taillight during a blizzard, killing him and shattering the taillight lens, and then fled the scene. So that is basically what they're saying. And at this point in time, because remember, this document was done in September of last year, the Commonwealth has actually changed their tune now, and they're stating that because they realized that their theory of the 3-point turn kind of didn't make sense, and now they're saying that she reversed from a farther vantage point and reversed at like 24 miles an hour, speeding backwards to run him over, which I don't think so, but she'd have to be really angry with him. I mean, you have to, I don't know, to just, never mind. Let's keep going. All right. So Ryan Nagel's testimony, however, completely undermines the Commonwealth's theory by confirming that Mr. O'Keefe had already left the vehicle and the surrounding area before Ms. Reed could possibly have initiated a 3-point turn, striking Mr. O'Keefe in the head with the back of the vehicle. So the defense has a key witness, and they're providing exculpatory evidence, or, an eyewitness account that exculpates Karen from doing this heinous crime of backing into John. All right, so to be clear, no witness suggests that they observed Ms. Reed strike Mr. O'Keefe with her vehicle, injure him in any way, make a 3-point turn, or otherwise drive erratically on the night in question. Not one. The Commonwealth's theory is predicated entirely on flimsy speculation and presumption, underpinned by a questionable investigation and highly dubiously claimed physical evidence. That's a It's a nicely worded sentence there. Yeah. So they're questioning the investigation and how evidence could have been potentially planted, especially because the people, it's a conflict of interest, and Proctor should not have been investigating this or even near this case if he knew these people. So where was I? Meanwhile, at least 6 individuals claim to have left the Albert residence in the early morning of January 29th, after Ms. Reed had left the Fairview residence and returned home. So those people are Jennifer McCabe and Matthew McCabe. Jennifer McCabe and Matthew McCabe purportedly drove Julie Nagel and an unnamed female home at 1:30. Brian Higgins supposedly went to, he's the ATF agent, he supposedly went to complete administrative work at the Canton Police Department at 1:30 a.m. after they'd all been drinking, which is suspicious enough as it is. But it's in here. They, yeah, I can't. 28. Okay, so yeah, that's it. These are facts that were brought to light at the grand jury testimony. So everything that the defense has in here is coming from grand jury testimony or other known facts of the case. All right, so where was I? Brian Higgins went to the police department, and Colin Albert returned home to his parents' residence at approximately 12:30 a.m. Yet none of these individuals, not one, claims to have seen Mr. O'Keefe's body sprawled in Brian Albert's front yard, mere feet from the very roadway of all of them would have driven on. So they would have driven past him. Several hours later, when Mr. O'Keefe failed to return home or respond to any of her phone calls and messages, Ms. Reed grew increasingly concerned. Third-party witnesses confirmed it would have been completely out of character for Mr. O'Keefe to leave his 2 adopted children home alone unattended overnight. So he would have come home, at least, even if he was fighting with Karen, he would have come home for the kids. So phone records from the night in question established that Ms. Reed made numerous calls to Mr. O'Keefe in the early morning of January 29th. Unable to reach him, she began frantically calling his friends, beginning around 5 a.m. in an effort to locate him. Jennifer McCabe, Brian Albert's sister-in-law, and Carrie Roberts answered her early morning calls and offered to assist her in searching for Mr. O'Keefe. All right, so during their call, Ms. McCabe suggested that Ms. Reed drive to her residence located on the other side of town at 12 Country Lane so that they could look for John together. So we knew that. Ms. Reed subsequently drove to pick up Ms. McCabe across town. Ms. McCabe then drove Ms. Reed's car back to Mr. O'Keefe's residence, back to John's house, where they met Carrie Roberts, because remember, she followed behind and would have seen the tail light. And while she was following behind, but also they went in her car to go look for John, because Karen wanted to leave her car behind because she was too hysterical to drive. So they left Mr. Reed's car there. Ms. Reed's car. They left Ms. Reed's car. That's a typo. They left Ms. Reed's car there, and after conducting a final check to ensure that he did not return home, Carrie Roberts drove Ms. McCabe and Ms. Reed back to the Fairview residence to see if he might be there. As they pulled up to Brian Albert's house at 6:04 a.m., Ms. Reed spotted an unconscious man, Mr. O'Keefe, lying face up on his back in the front yard of the Brian Albert residence. While Ms. Reed and Ms. Roberts attempted to render aid, Ms. McCabe called 911. Mr. O'Keefe was subsequently transported by EMTs to Good Samaritan Hospital, where tragically he was pronounced dead at 7:59 a.m. So it was sometime later he was pronounced dead. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about the responding officers here. So that was kind of like an overview of the timeline. It's some of it was repetitive, but it's giving us a background of this case. So now we're kind of understanding what the events were that were taking place and who the people are, and it's helpful to help us pick apart what's truth, what's speculated, what could be lies. We'll keep digging. All right, so collusion between Brian Albert and the witnesses in this case. One of Canton Police Department's first responding officers on scene, Officer Mullaney, testified that the homeowners of 34 Fairview Road, i.e. Brian Albert, never came outside to interact with anyone at the crime scene or speak to the responding officers. And that is grand jury testimony from Officer Mullaney. So Brian Albert never came out of the house. The homeowners did not come out of the house until after John had already been taken off from the scene. So instead of the percipient witnesses in the case apparently gathered at Brian Albert's house to get their story straight, Canton Police Department Detective Sergeant Link, who was not scheduled to work on January 29th, was asked by Sergeant Good to respond to the scene for some unknown reason to conduct interviews with Brian Albert and his family. Okay, so this detective, Detective Link, or Sergeant Link, Detective Sergeant Link, sorry, did not, he was not supposed to be scheduled to work. So this other sergeant had called him and asked him if he could respond to go talk to Brian Albert. Sergeant Link arrived at Brian Albert's house at approximately 6:24 a.m. and was only on scene for about an hour before returning to the Canton Police Department. Sergeant Good and Sergeant Link first interviewed Jennifer McCabe, Brian Albert's sister-in-law, at the crime scene. Alright, so during that interview, Jennifer McCabe gave a relatively innocuous statement indicating that she had seen Ms. Reed's vehicle outside the Fairview residence shortly after midnight and texted O'Keefe about where to park, but that no one ever came inside. She also confirmed that she did not see O'Keefe's body on Brian Albert's front lawn, and she left his residence at 1:30 a.m. So she didn't see him in the house, and she didn't see him on the lawn. So next, Sergeant Good and Sergeant Link went inside the Albert residence and conducted what appears to have been a group interview with Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, and Matthew McCabe. So why is it a group interview is a good question I have, because usually when you're interviewing, when there's a crime that occur or a potential crime, don't you want to interview people separately to understand what's going on? I don't know. The three witnesses, all of whom should have been prime suspects, were not separated and were interviewed by Sergeant Good and Sergeant Link together inside Brian Albert's home. So they should have been suspects, not witnesses, is what this is claiming. And I don't totally disagree. All right, so all three witnesses stated that O'Keefe was invited to Brian Albert's home but never arrived. So no one saw him, didn't see him, didn't happen. I don't know what you're talking about. Dead body? I don't know. All right, so Brian Albert's sister, Julie Albert, also appeared at Brian Albert's residence that morning. Julie Albert testified at the grand jury that she went to Brian Albert's house at 8:30 a.m. on January 29th to drop off Dunkin' Donuts for Brian Albert Jr.'s birthday. She explained that when she got there, Brian Albert insisted that she come inside and told her that there had been an accident. That's according to grand jury testimony. However, in a prior statement to Sergeant Buchanan and Sergeant Tully on February 10th, so some time has passed now, Ms. Albert accidentally let it slip that she actually found out about John dying when her phone woke her up at 4:55 a.m. to a call from Jennifer McCabe. So Jennifer McCabe called her at 4:45 and told her John was gone, or was they found his lifeless body. But she forgot that when she talked to police the first time. So interesting. She didn't remember when she found out. Those are two completely different stories. All right, so in a prior statement to law enforcement, Julie Albert indicated that she was notified about John's death before Karen Reed ever found O'Keefe's body. Yes, so that's also very important. 4:45, when Karen started calling people around 5 in the morning, and now we've got Julie Albert finding out before Karen Reed even finds his body. So that's curious. At 9 a.m., after apparently conferring with Brian Albert, her husband, her sister, her husband, and Julie Albert outside the outside the presence of the police, Jennifer McCabe personally called Sergeant Lank and asked him to return to Brian Albert's home because she had suddenly recalled some new information that she was not sure if law enforcement was aware of it. And she wanted to change her statement. So what time did Sergeant Lank come out there? 6:24. So 6:24 a.m. Sergeant Lank is out there with the first time that he interviews the Albert family, and it's like a group interview. They're all questioned at the same time, and then and as we read, it seemed like Brian was inserting himself into the investigation. So then here at 9 a.m. they call the Sergeant Lank back and ask him to return to change their statement after they've all conferred longer and had more time to talk about their stories. All right, so this time, in the presence of Brian Albert, Ms. McCabe reported to Sergeant Lank for the very first time that while they were driving around that morning looking for O'Keefe, Ms. Reed made a statement to the effect of, "I hope I didn't hit him." So this came up in the second interview, which is interesting, that they never brought it up the first time, and then repeated it again at the scene of the crime. So yeah, she's telling them that she said while they were driving around looking, she said she hit him, and then again when they found him, she said she hit him, or thought she hit him, or hoped she didn't hit him. Whatever her phrasing is, it had something to do with Karen hitting him. So thus, after meeting with Brian Albert, Jennifer McCabe changed her story to insinuate that Ms. Reed had hit O'Keefe with her vehicle. Brian Albert also made sure to inform his close friend, Brian Higgins, that O'Keefe's body had been found. So Brian Higgins testified at the grand jury on the 29th that he woke up to a call from Canton Chief of Police. All right, so the Chief of Police is now calling this Higgins guy. It's Brian Higgins. All right. So, after ignoring the chief's call, he did take a call from Brian Albert. What? What? So Brian Higgins ignores the chief's call, and then he takes a call from Brian Albert, who informed him that the authorities had found O'Keefe. Thus, in the hours after O'Keefe's body was found, Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, Jennifer McCabe, Matthew McCabe, Julie Albert, and Brian Higgins all immediately convened at Brian Albert's house to discuss the instant investigation. So that's not how investigations are supposed to go. If someone's a suspect, when the crime happens, people that are in that area are usually considered suspects until they're ruled out. And that might take months. So, I don't know. You guys tell me what you're feeling in this story, in this narrative, how this is going. What key points are sticking out to you regarding the Commonwealth? What do you think about the defense's case? Do they have a strong argument that John wasn't in the house, or that John was in the house, that he left Karen's vehicle and that he did enter the house? Let me know in your comments below. All right. So yeah, I just want to hear what you guys think about this. We have a little ways to go still. I hope that you don't mind and you don't find these boring, because I love reading these. I feel like this is my new calling in life, is to watch court trials and read through court documents. It's just something that I find very fun to do. In that I like uncovering the things that need to be uncovered. I like to look for the clues. And being such a fan of true crime and following true crime my whole life and seeing what the true crime genre has grown into, I don't want to be like everybody else. I want to get to the facts. I want to get to the truth. I don't want to just sensationalize my stories and I don't want to write a story. I want to let you guys see the facts and decide for yourself what's true and what isn't. And that's what I really hope to bring with this channel, is because I want everyone to see. We need more transparency. We need to see into our court systems, because if we don't know what's going on, it could be us behind bars and we don't understand the law or our rights, which are also often violated, very often. So this is why I want to bring these cases, especially this one, to light, because there's so much, in my opinion, it looks very corrupt to me. So moving on, facts relating to law enforcement's subsequent investigation to the death of Mr. O'Keefe. Given that Brian Albert and Brian Higgins were so closely tied to the Canton Police Department, jurisdiction was transferred to the Massachusetts State Police. Okay. Despite the fact high-ranking members of the Canton Police Department have continued to insinuate themselves in the investigation of this case. So Canton Police are still trying to insert themselves into this case, but it was transferred because of the ties that Brian Higgins, Brian Albert have, and possibly Trooper Proctor as well. So a timeline of the recovery of evidence and the involvement of law enforcement agents who have close personal relationships with the recipient witnesses and potential suspects involved in this case, at the very least, raise serious questions as to the objectivity and veracity of the police investigation that have been conducted to date. Man, I love these filings. I love when it gets spicy and the lawyers get a little spicy. Throw in some flowerful language and it just sounds so pretty. According to the supplemental report prepared by Canton Police Sergeant Michael J. Lank, after first responders secured the scene on January 29th, shortly after 6 a.m., My dog needs her blanket covering her. Like I said, she's the diva. All right, so shortly after 6 a.m., Sergeant Link, Lieutenant Gallagher, and Sergeant Good attempted to retrieve as much evidence as possible in and around the area where Mr. O'Keefe had been found, using an over-the-counter leaf blower to blow away the top layers of snow. They used a leaf blower, which, if anybody knows anything about leaf blowers, they blow things around. So who knows what they... I have thoughts. I have so many thoughts. All right, so yeah, that was it. According to the grand jury testimony of Michael Lank, they use a leaf blower to collect evidence. And we already know they used the red Solo cups to collect blood, or what they thought was that substance in the snow. So they had a bunch of Solo cups with what they thought they're collecting DNA, and using a leaf blower to clear the snow away for collecting evidence. It just baffles my mind. All right, at the grand jury, Sergeant Good testified that he and his team spent approximately 2 hours using the leaf blower to clear off the scene pretty good. Quote, clear, end quote, off the scene, quote, pretty good, end quote. Okay. So, not really trusting this team that collected the evidence, but just saying. All right. So that morning, they recovered the following evidence from the crime scene. 1, a clear, broken drinking glass. And 2, 6 frozen blood droplets, or drops, which they placed in over-the-counter red Solo plastic cups that were provided by a neighbor. No red or clear pieces of plastic consistent with a taillight lens were observed or recovered by any of the officers inspecting the scene at that time. And that's important. They were using their snowblower, the leaf blower to melt the snow and find evidence, and yet none of the tail light pieces were found at that time. Keep that in mind. The Massachusetts State Police officially assumed jurisdiction of the case upon Mr. O'Keefe's passing at 7:59. Okay. According to Trooper Proctor's affidavit filed in support of the geofence search warrant, Trooper Proctor claims that he drive in North Dighton. That's Reed's parents' residence. Sorry, didn't mean to read that. For the purpose of interviewing Ms. Reed and recovering her black Lexus SUV. According to her sworn affidavit, upon arriving in North Dighton at 4... my battery's running low. Hold on one second. I need to plug my laptop in so we don't die. Okay. All right, so for the purpose of interviewing and recovering her Lexus, they went to the Ms. Reed's house. According to his sworn affidavit, upon arriving in North Dighton at 4:30 p.m. on January 29th, Trooper Proctor claims that he noticed that the right rear passenger side taillight of Ms. Reed's vehicle was shattered, and a large red plastic piece was missing from the taillight. Okay, so remember, as we were reading through the Commonwealth's case, they originally, the probable cause affidavit originally said that Jen McCabe said that the taillight was cracked, and then it went from cracked to shattered, and cracked or something and missing pieces, and now it's shattered and large red plastic pieces missing from the taillight. So it's like that description kept evolving. So almost like Karen, as if Karen gave the Alberts this gift by shattering her taillight, if she indeed shattered it when she backed out of John's driveway when she went to go look for him, which I believe she did, because in another episode we'll look at the video, we'll look at pictures of the taillight, we'll look, we'll go deeper into the taillight. But yeah, so I believe that her saying to them, or them seeing the tail light and her saying, like, on top of everything else, I can't find John, and I might notice my tail light's broken or whatever. And then it's almost like it was a gift to the Alberts and McCabe's, this group, that they could pin it on her, like, oh, see, her car, she shattered her tail light, she obviously hit John, which doesn't add up, because his injuries don't add up to what to a low impact vehicle collision would be. All right, so according to a sworn affidavit, Trooper Proctor claims that he noticed that the right rear passenger side taillight of Ms. Reed's vehicle was shattered and large red plastic pieces were missing. According to his sworn affidavit, at approximately 5:30, Sergeant Buchanan and I seized the black Lexus from the driveway, and Diamond Towing transported the vehicle to the Canton Police Department, where it was secured in their Sallyport garage. Thus, Trooper Proctor claimed that the seizure and subsequent towing of the vehicle did not occur until 5:30 p.m. According to Kevin O'Hara, team leader of Massachusetts State Police Special Emergency Response Team, or the CERT team, he received a call from State Police Lieutenant Brian Tully on the afternoon of January 29th, stating he did not have authorization to dispatch the CERT team yet, but was going to need assistance searching for evidence on the roadway in front of the residence located at 34 Fairview Road. Subsequent reports confirm that at 5:30 p.m., the CERT team, along with Detective Lieutenant Brian Tully from the Massachusetts State Police, conducted a second search of the crime scene located outside the Fairview residence. So now a second search is happening. And this time, the police recovered 3 pieces of red and clear plastic from the exact same area Sergeant Link and his colleagues had searched hours earlier and saw no such evidence. Trooper Proctor claimed in his report that the plastic shards were consistent with Miss Reed's taillight. So, now they've gone multiple times back to the scene. They've had multiple teams out there, and they keep finding these pieces that weren't there the first time. These pieces of taillight. So that is something to think about. All right, so significantly, Trooper Proctor's timeline of events as set forth in his sworn affidavit in support of the geofence warrant is provably false. Significantly, Trooper Proctor's timeline of events as set forth in his sworn affidavit in support of the geofence warrant is provably false. Security footage taken from Ms. Reed's parents' residence, in Dighton, establishes that Ms. Reed's black Lexus SUV was towed from the driveway by Diamond Towing in North Dighton at 4:12 p.m., not 5:30, as Trooper Proctor's affidavit suggests, meaning that Trooper Proctor had possession of this car long before the towing company. So that came from the still frame from Reed's residence alarm. So they have undeniable proof that the towing company came at 4:12, not 5:30. So that means possibly, potentially, um, that Trooper Proctor made a mistake, or but it was Proctor and who was the other one with him? I can't remember. So there were two that followed in the timeline. We talked about it before. I can't remember who it was, but there were two officers that followed, and I think it might have been Buchanan, and they potentially either wrote the wrong time down or in their report, or on accident or on purpose. I mean, there's only two ways to do it: accident or on purpose. So they might be fudging the timeline so that they could have had more time with the car to take out tail light pieces. So that altered timeline means that both the Lexus SUV as well as Trooper Proctor would be unaccounted for during the entirety of the 1 hour and 18-minute gap. Thus, Trooper Proctor and certain personnel from the Canton Police Department, where the vehicle was towed, had unfettered access not only to Ms. Reed's vehicle and its taillight, but to the crime scene as well for more than an hour before the CERT team executed its search on that scene. So they could have planted, someone could have planted taillight pieces right before the CERT team got there, and then the CERT team could have found it and legitimately think that it's evidence. Thereafter, that search miraculously revealed for the first time red and white pieces of plastic found on the ground consistent with the taillight of Ms. Reed's vehicle, thereby establishing the only physical evidence against Ms. Reed in the entire case. Wow. I need a breather for that and a sip of water because that was a lot. Yeah. So, I mean, this is just flat out implicating that there's possible planting of evidence. All right, so the investigation of the crime scene, however, did not stop there. According to Detective Michael Lank's testimony before the grand jury on February 4th, 2022, one full week after Mr. O'Keefe's passing, Ken Berkowitz, the chief of the Canton Police Department, purportedly drove by the Fairview residence on a whim and saw from his moving vehicle an additional piece of red plastic that was consistent with the taillight of Miss Reed's vehicle. Interesting. More taillight. And he just saw it from the road as he was driving. He saw it from the street, from his car. So he must have really good eyesight, that chief of police. All right, so it is worth recalling that this was a scene that had been searched, researched, and searched again by no fewer than 3 sets of police officials. Yet Chief Berkowitz claimed that he glanced from his moving car while driving, saw a tiny shard of lens material on the ground many yards away, and at speed recognized the shard's evidentiary value and stopped his car to report the finding. Very, very good detective work. I mean, obviously, it's good detective work. Straining credulity does not begin to describe this account. It is worth noting that one of the officers under the chief's command, Kevin Albert, is Brian Albert's brother. Dun dun dun! It just gets thicker and deeper. All right, so Detective Lank testified that the chief of police then notified the Massachusetts State Police to report what he had discovered. However, before state troopers arrived, Canton police officers had already responded to the scene and taken photographs of what the chief of police claimed to have found on the roadway on February 4th, 2022. So when an incredulous grand juror specifically inquired as to why the chief of police had responded to the Fairview residence and how he discovered the evidence, Detective Lank explained nobody called the chief. Okay, so that was according to Michael Link. His testimony. Nobody called the chief. When pressed further by the juror as to why he just wandered over there, Detective Link recounted through hearsay. He was driving down Fairview Road and he saw it, the evidence. Equally suspicious is that Brian Higgins testified that his close personal friend, the chief of police, Ken Berkowitz, called Higgins for some unknown reason in the early morning of January 29th, just before Brian Albert notified Higgins that Mr. O'Keefe had been found dead in his front yard. So Brian Higgins testified that his close personal friend, the chief of police, had called Higgins for some unknown reason that morning, right before Brian Albert notified Higgins that John O'Keefe died. So, Chief Berkowitz repeated and convenient involvement. Oh, I'm sorry. Chief Berkowitz's repeated and convenient involvement in an investigation that is outside his jurisdiction should, at the very least, raise eyebrows, especially considering his close ties to the January 29th occupants of 34 Fairview Road. Finally, the fact that law enforcement retrieved pieces of Ms. Reed's taillight outside Brian Albert's house during multiple subsequent searches is particularly unsettling, given that a motion-activated Ring camera from Mr. O'Keefe's residence suggests that the damage to Ms. Reed's vehicle actually occurred hours later at 5:07 a.m. So, like I said, we've got some Ring camera from Mr. O'Keefe's house. We'll look at that later when we get more into the tail light. But for now, let's keep moving along because we still have a few more pages to go. All right, so video surveillance footage captured at 5:07 a.m. on January 29th shows Ms. Reed reverse her Lexus out of Mr. O'Keefe's parking garage such that the right rear tail light of her vehicle struck Mr. O'Keefe's parked Chevy Traverse. As shown in the attached video surveillance clearly shows Ms. Reed's vehicle striking the Chevy Traverse at 0:18 seconds, causing the Traverse to jostle back and forth. As Ms. Reed drives out of the frame from left to right, a flash of the white tail light bulb is clearly visible through what is an obvious crack in the red taillight lens. It is undisputed that after the Lexus struck the Chevy, it never went back to the scene at Brian Albert's house. It did, however, go to police custody before the police miraculously started finding pieces of the taillight at 34 Fairview Road. Miraculously. In sum, the evidence establishes that the Lexus taillight lens was, in fact, not shattered at Brian Albert's house at or around 12:15 a.m. Rather, it was cracked when it contacted the Chevy Traverse at Mr. O'Keefe's residence at 5:07 a.m., hours after O'Keefe's death. How those shards of lens plastic actually got to the crime scene to be recovered by the CERT team is becoming clearer as the defense investigation continues. All right, so now we've moved on to the argument. This is what Karen Reed's defense team is arguing in their motion here. And this is the motion to obtain the data, the mobile data records and the Celebrite records from the parties in the case. So this is their argument. Under Commonwealth versus Lampron, 441 Massachusetts 265, that's a Massachusetts case in 2004, a court may issue a pretrial summons for records in the possession of third parties if the party seeking the summons shows that 1, the documents are evidentiary and relevant, 2, they are not otherwise procurable reasonably in advance of trial by exercise of due diligence, 3, the party cannot properly prepare for trial without inspection of the records before trial, and that the late disclosure of the records might unreasonably delay trial. And 4, the application is made in good faith and is not intended as a general fishing expedition. As explained below, the categories of records sought by this motion meet all 4 prongs of the land prawn test. So A, we'll go through them one by one. I'll explain them, I can explain them more as we go along, what each of those are, because it was kind of convoluted the way it was worded. So the letter A, the trusted records are evidentiary and relevant. So obviously, they want these records because it should be admissible according to them. As all these individuals were involved that night, they should receive those records. So to satisfy the first requirement of Lampron, the defendant must make a factual showing that the evidence sought has a rational tendency to prove or disprove an issue in the case. Com versus Jones, 478, Massachusetts, 65 and 68, 2017, quoting Lampron. And again, 441, Massachusetts. To meet this standard, the defendant need not make a showing that the records actually contain information that carries, for example, the potential for establishing the unreliability of either the criminal charge or a witness on whose testimony the charge depends. So, the defendant doesn't have to show that these records doesn't have to prove what they show, just the fact that they have it's the potential for establishing the unreliability of the witness or the charges that are against Karen. So rather, the defendant must only advance in good faith at least some factual basis indicating how the records are likely to be relevant to an issue in the case. So they don't have to say what they... Anyway, let's keep going on. Relevance is a broad concept, and any information which tends to establish or at least shed light on an issue is relevant. Adoption of Carla, 416, Massachusetts, 510, 513. See also Com versus Tucker. All right, explaining evidence is relevant and admissible if connection with other evidence, it helps a little. All right. So, here, as explained in the fact section above, Ms. Reed has uncovered significant evidence tending to show that a third party is responsible for the death of her late boyfriend, John O'Keefe. A review of the autopsy photographs clearly show injuries consistent with Mr. O'Keefe having been severely beaten and left for dead. Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, Jennifer McCabe, Matthew McCabe, Brian Higgins, Colin Albert, and Julie Nagel were all present at Brian Albert's residence around 12:15 a.m. when Ms. Reed dropped him off to attend Brian Albert's party on January 29th. The importance of uncovering the party's movements and communications in the early morning of the 29th cannot be understated. Ryan Nagel's testimony clearly establishes that O'Keefe had already exited Ms. Reed's vehicle and gone somewhere before Ms. Reed could possibly have initiated a three-point turn, supposedly striking O'Keefe in the head with the back of her vehicle. So, John, according to Mr. Nagel, he did not see John anywhere near or outside the vehicle, was not in the vehicle. So that helps Miss Reed's case. So O'Keefe, by all accounts, had every intention of joining Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, Jennifer McCabe, Matthew McCabe, Brian Higgins, Colin Albert, and Julie Nagel. Thus, the communications and location information of the 7 individuals who are known to have been in close proximity of O'Keefe at the time of his passing are unquestionably relevant to this case. I like how this guy writes. This is by Karen's lawyer, Giannetti, Mike Giannetti, I think it is. Yeah, we'll see his name at the end. All right, so moreover, the defense has cited ample evidence that in the days following O'Keefe's death, Brian Albert and the other individuals who were at his house on the night in question have engaged in considerable communications about the facts and circumstances surrounding O'Keefe's death. So we already know that they've had in-person meetings, so what were their communications over the phone? That's relevant. We need to know that, or the defense does. Right, therefore, communications obtained from the parties' cell phones will undoubtedly reveal communications between and among the parties themselves about their knowledge and involvement in this case, and their communications with the members of law enforcement who were assigned to investigate the case. So, not just the individuals that were there that night, but what other law enforcement individuals were in on this investigation and had any kind of inside knowledge that these people might have been involved. That's something that is definitely important to look into. All right, so because of the close familiar relationships between and among the percipient witnesses in the case, it is absolutely necessary to obtain communications from all interested parties in order to reveal the extent of the communication and coordination with law enforcement that the defense has reason to believe has occurred in this case. All right, the next prong of this Lampron case. So B, the requested records are not otherwise procurable reasonably in advance of trial by exercise of due diligence. Yeah, they would obviously have to get a warrant to get, or not a warrant, but, get it court ordered that they receive these, their cell phone records. So second, Lampron requires that the requested records are not otherwise procurable reasonably in advance of trial by exercise of due diligence. Lampron. Here, the cell phone records sought from Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, Matthew McCabe, Julie Albert, Brian Higgins, Colin Albert, and Julie Nagel are in the possession of the witnesses themselves and have not been turned over to law enforcement. Additionally, with respect to Ms. McCabe's cell phone records, the Commonwealth has, up to this point, withheld all communications between and among Ms. McCabe and any witnesses other than Karen Reed, Carrie Roberts, and John O'Keefe. Thus, Ms. Reed cannot obtain these critical records without the issuance of a summons and or order for protection from this court. All right. I love how he writes. C. The defense cannot effectively prepare for trial without these records, and the failure to obtain this information may unreasonably delay trial. So third, Lampron requires that the party seeking the records show that he or she cannot properly prepare for trial without inspection of the records before trial, and that the late disclosure of the records might unreasonably delay trial. That's coming from Lampron. Here, Ms. Reed needs access to this information well in advance of trial in order to effectively cross-examine the prosecution's witnesses and establish her third-party culpability defense at trial. So in order to obtain the communications and location data the defense is seeking, a forensic examiner will need time to make a forensic copy of the devices and subsequently analyze the data for relevant data communications exchanged between the 28th between January 28th through February 28th, and location data for 7-day period spanning January 28th to February 4th can be produced for defense counsel review. Even after that process is complete, it is likely that the production of this information will identify additional witnesses that the defense will need to interview. If this cellular data is not obtained in advance of trial, it will unquestionably result in an unreasonable delay. So they're saying we need this because, and we need this now because if we get it too late or if we don't get it in time, other witnesses may come up. It takes time to process this information, and other witnesses may come up in the course of looking through, investigating these texts and phone calls. So, yeah, it's important that we get this and ASAP. All right, D. The instant request is not a fishing expedition. So fourth, and this is the final prong, land prom requires a party seeking a summons to show that the application is made in good faith and not merely as a fishing expedition. Here, Ms. Reed's request is narrow and targeted to messages stored on recipient witnesses' devices between these specific dates. Moreover, Ms. Reed's request for location information is limited to a 7-day period between the 29th and the 31st. i.e., the days in which the substantive investigation and recovery of evidence was taking place. So based on a review of the police reports and transcripts procured in the instant case, defense counsel has a good faith belief that the cell phones at issue will contain numerous communications between and among the recipient witnesses. Okay. So accordingly as set forth above, the defense has satisfied its burden under Lampron to get the data for all of those individuals listed. And yeah, so I liked that, I like this document, and like I said, I chose this one even though it was, these are all the, David Yannetti, sorry, it's David Yannetti as the, one of the lawyers. She has two. She has Alan Jackson and Yannetti, representing her right now. And this is just an affidavit from David Yannetti saying that he believes they need this information. He needs this information to fully represent her. And then all this other stuff is just part of the exhibits and stuff. There's pictures, but like I said, they're black and white, so you can't really see. But there are pictures here of Proctor, Trooper Proctor with the Alberts, and you can see the names, Colin Albert, Courtney Proctor. There's better pictures online, and we can do that in the next episode, where we will talk more about the relationships of the people involved and the different people. I know we've covered them all, but we definitely want to go a little bit deeper into each individual and how they're related and whether or not you think that there's a conflict of interest. If you do, please let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube-y things, please, for me. I would love it if my channel started to blow up, because I really think that this case is important to be viewed by people, because we in our nation, in our country, the United States of America, we should know what's going on with our law enforcement, and there should be much more transparency than what's going on in apparently Canton, Massachusetts. So, anyways, let's stop here, and I will. I hope to see you in the next episode. Like I said, we're going to go over all the different people that are involved and how they're related, and if you're confused by everybody, we'll touch base with that and kind of go over pictures and everything. So, with that being said, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that you join me next time.